Not good? Do I need to be taller, smaller? Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to today's special presentation from TIAA Bank Field here in Jacksonville, where tomorrow at 3:30 p.m., the number one ranked Georgia Bulldogs will tackle the Florida Gators. And what a week of buildup it's been. I know that, everyone's anticipating next week's game with Tennessee, but I'll tell you, not down here. Everybody that I've run across has been talking about this game, 3:30 p.m., CBS game, national game. A lot is on the line for the Georgia Bulldogs in Florida with their backs against the wall. I talked to some of the Gators the other night at the football building, their new $85 million football building. And Brenton Cox was very locked in for this game. He absolutely has had this circled on his calendar. Brenton Cox 1-1 against the Georgia Bulldogs in the last 2 years. Stetson Bennett 1-1 against the Florida Gators. And by the way, don't forget to wish Stetson Bennett a happy birthday. Stetson Bennett, 25 years old today. So the birth boy will take the field tomorrow. Georgia, a 22.5-point favorite. And I got to tell you, I'm not quite sure that 22 isn't too many points. I looked at some numbers today, and I wrote a few stories. They're on DawgNation.com, or you can see them on my Twitter at MikeGriffith32. I don't know if you realize this or not, but Georgia has only played one Power 5 team that's ranked in the top 50 in the nation in rushing, and that was Oregon. And the Ducks actually outrushed Georgia that day. Even though they lost 49-3, they were able to run the ball. Now, the Gators, one of the best running teams in the country, this will be the best offensive line that Georgia has seen this year. I wasn't aware of this until just this week, but 3 of the top 4 rushers in the SEC in yards per carry play for Florida. Florida leads the nation in yards per carry and fewest tackles for loss allowed. So this is a Gator offense that's got a little bit more bite than maybe we would have thought. Now, Anthony Richardson, he's been very up and down, very inconsistent. I think that Georgia's coaching gives the Bulldogs a big advantage in this game tomorrow. Actually, I think that's the winning edge is Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann and Will and Todd Monken. I think this is why Georgia wins tomorrow, as much as anything, because this Georgia team hasn't been tested in a minute. You take a look at the schedule and who they've played lately: Vanderbilt, Auburn, Missouri. Not exactly the cream of the league, so to speak. I see Kevin Cook has the questions. He says he hopes that Georgia beats the Gators so bad they never want to play in Jacksonville again. I would say this. I'm all for Georgia getting the home game back in Athens like Kirby Smart wants, but I wouldn't mind if Florida kept their home game here. Now, it wouldn't be a 50-50 split if the Gators did that, but at least people would be able to maintain the tradition of coming down to Jacksonville every other year. So, Kevin, I know the sentiment. I know there's a lot of Georgia fans that feel that way. Obviously, this is a game that means a lot to Georgia fans, a long-standing rivalry. Kirby Smart has really taken it over and dominated it. They've won 4 of the last 5. Yeah, the Gators won the pandemic year with Kyle Trask, but that was, I think, largely because of the injury to Stetson. I think Georgia was actually up 14-0 when Stetson got injured in this game 2 years ago and hurt his shoulder, and Dwan Mathis had to come in. So understand the sentiment there, Kevin, but I'm not so sure when that decision is going to be made. Every time I've talked with Josh Brooks about it, and it's been a minute, but he's told me they're going to play this thing out. And the reason why is because they need to make sure that there's going to be a 9-game conference schedule before they do anything with this. And the 9-game conference schedule enables both Georgia and Florida to have 4 home games every year for sure. And then maybe that every other year situation, maybe you're playing at a neutral site or maybe not. I don't know. Kirby made it sound like this game's going to be coming back to Athens soon. This is the last year that Georgia has a designated home game in this series under the current contract. Next year, Georgia will be playing here against Florida in Florida's designated home game. And that's when the contract runs out at the end of the 2023 season. So I know there's been a lot of talk about it, and that decision will be made later. But for now, it's in Jacksonville, and everyone's excited about this weekend. Everyone's excited to see how Georgia attacks it coming off of a bye week. You take a look at Kirby Smart. One thing you know for sure, if anybody's going to have a chance to beat Georgia, they're going to have to score at least 20 points. Kirby's only lost one game when a team has scored 20 or more points, or 20 or less points, and that was South Carolina in 2019, and it took everything. It took a Rodrigo field goal miss. It took Jake a few interceptions, receivers running the wrong routes, and South Carolina having a bye week. So if Florida wants to have any chance at all, they'd have to score over 20. I'm not sure how many points the Gators are going to score. I do think they're going to get on the board. I do think they're going to be able to move the ball. But Anthony Richardson, he's been somewhat of a turnover machine. If you've got any questions, by the way, type them into the comments. My producer, Michael Carbell, will pass them along to me. We're going to have a few more minutes talking about this year's game. I went over to, as I said, the Gators football facility the other day and found out that Osiris Torrance, this is Florida's best offensive lineman and offensive guard, the highest rated player on their offensive line. He will be returning for this game. He's 6'4", he's 347. Andrea Watson says, dogs rule, Gators drill. I can tell the Georgia fans are getting excited about this football game. They're kind of getting their hate on. I don't know if you were surprised, but that Brenton Cox interview I did the other day, some people even said Brenton sounded a little humble. The thing that took me back a little bit is he said he's not even sure that his dad, Brenton Cox Sr., is going to be rooting for the Gators because he's such a Georgia fan. And so you wonder, what it's like in Brenton's family this week, kind of a divided household with all the Georgia fans, and now Brenton down there playing at Florida. He would have another year at eligibility, by the way. Not sure if Brenton Cox is going to go pro or not for Florida this year. May come back for another year. Uncertain about that. You look at Georgia on the other side. The fact that the Bulldogs are number one, to me, is such a credit to the recruiting and the coaching that Kirby Smart's done. I mean, this is a program that lost a record 15 players to the NFL draft and had another 13 transfer out. So you think about that. I see Harry Legge. He's another guy really excited about the upcoming destruction of the Florida Gators. And certainly Kirby Smart, if you heard that locker room video from last year at halftime, I think Kirby said he wanted to break Florida. He said a lot of other things that I can't repeat on this channel that would be beeped out if you ever heard that. But certainly Kirby Smart will be motivated and excited about bringing his team here tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. A lot of Georgia fans down here everywhere you go, from North Jacksonville to South Jacksonville. The Gator fans, I don't think they've really arrived in town yet. They'll be driving over from their home, or maybe they'll be selling their tickets to the Georgia fans in anticipation. Harry wants to know, is there wind in the forecast? The answer is yes. Very windy today, kind of a dreary, rainy, 72-degree day. This was originally the forecast for tomorrow, but I think this weather got here a day early, which is good. I think tomorrow I saw the forecast for about 15% chance of rain, and I want to say winds at about 11 miles an hour. Usually 10 miles an hour is when it can become a factor. This is an enclosed stadium behind me, as you can tell, an enclosed NFL stadium. Not sure that how much the wind will factor in on the field. I don't think that's going to be the biggest deal. I think the biggest deal is going to be the type of coverage that Florida plays. And, I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to do the Feinbaum show here about 5 o'clock on the SEC network. And that's something that I plan to bring up with Feinbaum is, how does Florida play Georgia? Because I think that's very important. You give Stetson Bennett zone coverage and he'll pick you apart. And we saw that. We saw that against Vanderbilt last week. Stetson very accurate on throws over 20 yards against zone coverage. Where Georgia's had trouble is when teams are playing man and playing very aggressive on defense. I don't think Florida has any chance of beating Georgia unless they gamble a lot on defense and really work hard to try to disrupt the Georgia offense. I just don't think you can sit back and try not to make mistakes. I see Eric Jackson. He says, hates to mention this, but what can Georgia take from this game and move forward to Tennessee? I think it's a very good question. I think actually Georgia can take a lot. I think this is going to be a litmus test for the Georgia run defense. I don't know, Eric, if you heard that stat earlier in the program, but Georgia's only faced one Power 5 team that ranked in the top 50 in the nation in rushing, and that was Oregon. And remember, back then, Jalen Carter was playing. We're not certain if Jalen Carter is going to play tomorrow. In fact, I would say he's probably less likely to play than more likely to play. So this is going to be a test for the Georgia front seven and how they match up against a really good offensive line. And, of course, Tennessee also able to run the ball. I don't know if you see the show on Monday nights that I do with Jeremy Pruitt, but Jeremy Pruitt says, look, for that offense at Tennessee to work, they've got to be able to run the ball. I know we all think about Hendon Hooker and his ability to throw the ball, but it's really the running game that sets that up, that keeps the Vols ahead of the chains and really makes that pass game possible. So I do think we're going to be able to tell a little bit. And conversely, I think Tennessee is going to be able to learn a little bit playing Kentucky about what they're going to see playing Georgia, because Kentucky also a very good defensive team that's able to run the ball effectively. So I think both of these teams are going to learn a lot more about themselves. I think either one of these games could be a lot closer than expected, because I'm not sure when the last time Tennessee was. Probably Florida, the last time they got tested. Andrew Hughes wants to know, do I think Georgia will be run heavy at any point in the game and win? As long as they can be. You know, and I know that Kirby Smart doesn't take any more chances than he has to. And I think if they can run the ball effectively, that's the best way to slow down the Gator offense, is to keep them off the field. You want to be able to run the ball. You look at last year's game, though, and Georgia, I think, went for about 190 yards rushing. I think the Gators went for about 161. Both of these teams tried to keep it on the game, keep it on the ground. Florida actually had more total yards than Georgia. You'll remember that Georgia had that huge 21-point swing there in the second quarter when Anthony Richardson turned the ball over on 3 consecutive possessions in the last 2.5 minutes. So I think Georgia will run the ball as much as they have to, or as much as they possibly can. And I think for Florida to win, they're going to have to force Stetson to throw the football. Why does Nolan Smith seem to elevate his play for Florida every year? Well, you know, Nolan is from that Savannah area, and I have a big belief that great players play their best in the big games. And certainly Nolan Smith was huge last year. We just talked about those 2 turnovers that Florida had in the final 3 minutes of the first half. Nolan Smith was directly involved in 2 of those. So you can bet that the Florida offensive line is going to know where he's at on every play, and they're going to do everything they can to neutralize Nolan. He's really been a star. And Benjamin wants to know my opinion on the best pass rushers on the Georgia team. I think it's Nolan Smith. I think he leads the team in sacks. It's a very modest number. Georgia at the bottom of the SEC in sacks, not something that you're accustomed to. But you have to understand how Kirby and Georgia go about their sacks. They don't just have their players run wildly and go after the quarterback. Everybody maintains gap integrity. So what do I mean by that? So when the 4 guys rush across the board, they all stay in their lane. And they do that so that if they don't get the sack, or if the quarterback eludes them, the quarterback doesn't have an escape alley, right? That prevents big plays when Georgia maintains that gap integrity. So they're not going to give up their gaps. They're not going to lose their discipline and get out of their lanes, because that opens up really big plays, especially against a guy like Anthony Richardson. You've got to be careful. You know, some people think, well, maybe you go after this guy. I think that's absolutely wrong. You do not go after Anthony Richardson. You sit back and make Anthony beat you with his ability to get through progressions and his arm. If you go after a running quarterback, you take one extra defender and bring him on a blind side, and Anthony picks it up and runs, that's one less guy in the back end that you have that can tackle a guy like Anthony Richardson. So you don't necessarily pressure mobile quarterbacks. It's almost like you're playing right into their hands when you pressure mobile quarterbacks. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of pressure. I don't think you're going to see a lot of sacks. They are going to try to push the pocket and get Anthony off his spot where he can't just stand in one place. You know, they want to have people at his feet where he's got to move around as he's looking for guys to throw, kind of disrupt that pocket. You know, who do I think could make a name for themselves tomorrow? I think most Georgia fans know all the names on the team already. But in terms of the national brand, it's been a minute since Georgia's played in a high-profile game. We just mentioned those last 3 opponents: Vanderbilt, Auburn, Missouri. Before that, you had Kent State, South Carolina. It's been a minute since Georgia's been the featured team. I think Malachi Starks is a guy that's played really good. He came up big against Oregon and South Carolina. I've been impressed with him in the big moments. I think Kenny McIntosh is going to get leaned on a lot tomorrow as a runner and as a pass catcher. You know, Kirby and the staff have done a really nice job of managing Kenny to get him to this point of the season healthy. He's your bell cow back. He's your guy that can do it all. So I think Kenny, Malachi Starks, I don't know the situation with A.D. Mitchell. Could Darnell Washington make a big name for himself? I think he could. I think Brock Bowers is going to get a lot of extra attention. I think Darnell could have a breakout game. I don't know how involved will Eric Gilbert be. Could we possibly see Eric Gilbert do anything? He had a touchdown catch in the last game. You know, could we see him coming into form? Someone asked, do I think they'll cover the spread? You know, my advice on these games like this is don't bet them. Rivalry games, I stay away from because you just don't know about the motivation. You don't know how teams are going to play. It seems like teams, when they play an emotional rival like this, they kind of raise their level of play up. Certainly if you're Florida, a lot of your season goals, you've already lost a few games. You're not necessarily going to win the SEC. So this is your Super Bowl, right? This is an opportunity for the Gators to shine. They have Florida State at the end of the year as well. So I wouldn't bet this game. I certainly 22 points in any rivalry game is always too much for me. But this is a game I'd stay away from, and I would just try to enjoy it. Anytime you put something into a game, kind of takes the pleasure away, especially if your favorite team wins and they don't necessarily win by as many points. That's kind of a sucky feeling, right? To not even be able to enjoy the game because you're worried about how many points are involved. So that's my advice there. Chris Knight wants to know the fan ratio between Georgia and Florida and Jacksonville. Can I tell the difference? Chris, as I said, I'm seeing all dog fans right now, but I always take into consideration that a lot of the Florida fans live here. I think it'll be close to a 50-50 split. I think Florida fans are excited about Anthony Richardson. He's dynamic. He gives them a great upside. He hasn't been consistent. He hasn't shown he can win a championship, but he's shown he can play really good. Remember when Florida played in Knoxville, they were thrown into the end zone at the end of the game with a chance to win after recovering an onside kick. So I say never. And I think the Florida fans are excited about the direction of their program, even though they lost out on a really big recruit that they thought they were going to get. So, man, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate everybody watching here. I hope you guys have enjoyed our little special this afternoon. Some thoughts, some feelings from Jacksonville. The weather, not exactly Chamber of Commerce weather today, as you can tell. Windy, cold, rainy, gray. This isn't exactly how the game's been built. But you know what? Tomorrow, the sun is going to be shining. They're going to have great weather. It'll be windy again, but they're going to have sunshine. I think temperatures will be in the high 70s. 3:30 p.m. It'll be a fantastic television audience, a great buildup. Number one dogs, big favorite in tomorrow's game. I think Kirby Smart's got these guys ready to play. I think Georgia's got championship depth. I wrote a story you may want to check out about Carson Beck. I think both of these teams have backup quarterbacks that are capable, but in that scenario, I really like Georgia's backup quarterback more than I like Florida's. So I think, and that's been a factor. 5 of the teams in the SEC this year have had to go to their backup quarterbacks because of injuries. So quick question, thoughts on Bo Nix's comments. What's he supposed to say? I hope that's what Bo Nix thinks. If he's my quarterback, I hope he thinks that he would win a rematch with Georgia. I hope he thinks he'd beat any team in the nation. The Ducks are playing really good. Would they win a rematch? I don't think so, not on a neutral field. I think it would be a heck of a lot closer, though. You got to remember that was Dan Lanning's first game. He was still learning a lot about his team. And I think Kirby, as I said at the beginning of this broadcast, I think Kirby Smart is absolutely outcoached that staff. That is the winning edge. Make no mistake about it. Georgia's got talent, but with Jalen Carter out and A.D. Mitchell out, those are some key guys. It's coaching right now. Coaching is what's going to get Georgia through the month of November. If the Dogs are going to stay undefeated, it's going to be because of the job Kirby Smart does coaching, because you're getting into a territory now where you're playing teams that are more evenly matched, have more experience, and are better. And it's going to take Kirby Smart's great coaching in addition to some great effort and execution. I think they're not just going to roll over everybody. Is Branson the real deal? I mean, he's as real as a freshman running back gets. He's not Nick Chubb, if that's the question you're asking. He's the third best running back on the team right now, but he's only a freshman. He will get better. Once he learns the plays, he won't be thinking as much, and we'll see more of that talent kick in. I do think he's a powerful runner. I think he's a capable runner, but I'm not ready to put him in the same conversation with Todd Gurley and Nick Chubb yet, or even Kenny McIntosh. Right now, Kenny McIntosh is the guy that could bring you to the promised land. His ability to catch the ball, his ability to take the run for the distance, his cutback ability, his vision, they're all elite. There's a reason why he was projected as the number 2 running back in the upcoming draft. He's going to try to show everyone that this month. And I do think Georgia will be able to run the ball with some efficiency tomorrow and have some balance. It's going to be a very interesting matchup, 3:30 p.m. at TIAA Bank Field. Kevin Flute says nobody's worried about Brent Cox. Well, I would probably tell you that he's their best defensive lineman. So I would say there will be a plan. I don't think worry would be the right word in the Georgia locker room. I do think there is a plan for him. Ventrell Miller, the linebacker, is their best player. They'll have him identified every snap as well. You can bet that Georgia's going to do everything they can to neutralize, number one, Brenton Cox. Very capable, very physical, older player. but he has not been able to finish on as many sacks this year as he would like. But he is a very capable player. Don't make no mistake about that. There's a reason why he was a 5-star. There's a reason why Georgia tried to sign him. Where's the party in Jacksonville tonight? I don't know. I'll have to reach out to Jeff Sentel. I think this is his city. He's got a lot of special memories here. I know Brandon Adams is going to be calling a game tonight in Georgia before he gets down here. So we'll have to track down Jeff Sentel and reach out to him on Twitter and ask. I think Jeff's coming down here. I believe he's probably bringing his wife as well. I think that there's a really good story there. I think you might have met her here. One of those romantic stories of love at first sight with Jeff Sentel and Jacksonville. A lot of special memories for a lot of Dog fans here. And you better believe there's going to be more people making memories tonight and tomorrow. But you and I both know Kirby Smart, the only memory he cares about is going to be on the scoreboard and getting ready for the next game. This is a no-nonsense coach that wants to win championships. And with all due respect to Jacksonville, Kirby wants that home game back in Athens, Georgia, so he can bring prospects in and be on a level playing field to compete with all these other teams that he's trying to beat for recruits, especially now in this NIL era. And that's just what you have right now. There's a reason why it took Georgia 41 years to win a second national title, and it wasn't coaching and it wasn't talent in the state. It was the business model. And I think Kirby Smart is a guy that Josh Brooks and President Jerry Moorhead have a lot of confidence in. If they didn't, they wouldn't have spent $240 million on football facilities and $112 million on his contract. So I think they're more inclined to listen to what Kirby has to say as Kirby looks to build Georgia into a dynasty. I see Arnold has a question. If UGA and Tennessee win, what's the point spread for next week? Best guess. I think I saw an advanced spread of 11 to 13 points. Hard to say what it would be next week. I think it would depend on the health of the teams, who looks good, who gets injured, who doesn't get injured. But I'm going to guess that's going to be an 11 to 13 point spread in that game. That's a whole nother animal. Again, if I'm a Georgia fan, I'm not. I'm a Georgia analyst. I'll tell you this. I'd be worried about that game tomorrow. I think Florida's going to have some first-half success. I think they're going to be able to run the ball. Remember, Dogs had been some slow starters before that Vanderbilt game. They did not score in the first quarter against Missouri. They did not score in the first quarter against Auburn. I do think Monken will scheme up 7 points for you. I'm not as impressed with this Florida defensive coordinator, Patrick Toney, as many others. This is one of the worst Florida defenses they've ever had. They're historically bad. So I do think Georgia will score some early. But I'm going to keep an eye on that Florida offense and Anthony Richardson. I think they're going to have a little bit of success running the ball. And if they can stay ahead of the chains, Richardson will be less inclined to make mistakes. But eventually, Kirby will get to him. Eventually, Georgia pressure will get to Anthony Richardson. Eventually, that Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp defense is going to force turnovers. That's going to be the difference in this game tomorrow, in my opinion. Closer than many people think, but I think the Dogs are going to prevail in the second half. I see Brandy with another question. I do not have the dog walk information. I don't know where it's at. I'm not sure how they do that here in Jacksonville. Sorry about that. I'm sure we'll try to publish something on DawgNation.com about that as far as when and where the dog walk is. We'll try to get that out on Twitter for you, Brandy. I wish I had that information handy, but I don't. Just stopped at the team hotel a moment ago. Not even sure how much of that they've finalized at this stage. So I'm going to call this a wrap. If you have any more questions, ask them in the comments below the video, or you could reach out to me on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Eric wants to know, can I throw a spiral? Yes, I can. How windy is it? Probably about 15 miles per hour. So it's been a lot of fun, though. This has been a neat deal. I always enjoy coming live at these different locations, and certainly Jacksonville, one of the more famous and traditional venues on the Georgia schedule. So everyone have a wonderful Friday night. Check us out tomorrow. Don't forget, Brandon Adams will be doing a pregame show before the game. And again, hit me up on Twitter at MikeGriffith32. Ask your questions in the comments. I will follow up. And I am now going to prepare. I will be on SEC Nation with Paul Feinbaum at 5 o'clock tonight. Everybody have a great Friday night and a great weekend.